Welcome back to Evergreen Perspective. I'm your host, Ben Chrisley, and we are joined today by one other than the only Senator Adrian Cortes from the 18th Legislative District right here in Washington State. That's the 18th Legislative District. It covers kind of Northeast Clark County. Adrian, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Wonderful for, well, actually, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. I know we've been kind of going back and forth to try to get this to actually happen. So I'm just so glad to be here with you today. So
Yeah, awesome. You know, kind of jump right in, right? I know you've been in public service for a while. You had a couple of terms as city council and battleground. Is that right?
yeah, I've served for 3 terms as a city council member with the city of Battleground, Washington. And then in addition to that, I served for 1 term as the city's mayor.
So tell me a little bit, I guess, the difference between obviously Olympia and then more that local government piece. How did you find that transition into Olympia?
Well, to be fair, they're both very different. However, there are a lot of crossover similarities or things that will help you get prepared to serve at the legislative level. Obviously, when you're a city council member and a mayor, you have a constituency group that you work with your community, your fellow community members. So you're, taking public comment. You're getting constituents to reach out to you on whether it be how you should balance the budget or where you should put the priorities of the budget in the city. Should you invest more in roads? Should you invest more in public safety? Where is the future of the city going to grow, et cetera, et cetera? And so many of those skills you use both. Well, you use at the state level, just on a far grander scale. For example, just on a daily basis out of session, we're getting, in excess of, 150 emails every day. When we're in session, that number is probably 10 times that amount. So in excess of 1,000 emails a day and hundreds of phone calls a day. When we're in session of all sorts of things, whether it's, constituency groups wanting me to, support a particular bill or wanting to talk to me about a particular piece of policy or help them navigate state government. And so, again, the city council as well as the mayor really helped prepare me to be a state senator and helped to build a lot of.
And so the difference between those two is obviously there's a divide there, but where did you find after serving now a year basically as in the Senate and you've, several years in local government, do you find the pressure difference? Was there from your constituents, did you find that more as a mayor or more as now a state senator?
Well, I mean, probably more obviously as a state senator, because as a mayor, you're the overwhelming majority of people that are reaching out and contacting you are people from your community. And so from the city. And for example, in the city of Battleground, we roughly have a population of about, 23,000 within city limits. And then obviously we have some, constituency groups that just live right outside in the urban growth areas of Battleground. And so, but as a state senator, you're getting contacted, from people within your district, of course, and inside the 18th district. There's roughly about 166,000 people in the 18th district. And then you're also getting contacted by people throughout the entire state of Washington contacting you to support a piece of legislation or to talk to you about a proposed piece of legislation. So it is a definitely a different constituency group in terms of just the sheer numbers.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. So, with that said, obviously you've deep involved in education. You're not only a Washington State senator, but you're also Dr. Adrian Cortes. Very, prestigious career in education. How does that help inform your decisions in Olympia?
Sure. You know, I am a teacher. I teach special education. Currently, that's my day job with at Camas School District, and I run one of the special education programs within their high school. Being able to not only serve my students but also advocate for them in terms of inclusion, advocate for them in terms of being able to access their education. And being able to communicate with parents and guardians and administrators and service providers and the like. And so, that has given me quite a lens, not only in understanding the kind of education system that we have in Washington state and how it serves individuals with disabilities and how it can be improved, which leads to, me being able to recommend better policy decisions at the state level. But it also helps, again, build those skills when it comes to working with different groups of people the policy level and being able to bring groups together.
And sure, what was it that made you want to make the switch between the mayor of Battleground and going into, you know, legislation in Olympia?
Well, frankly, being a state senator was not even on my radar. Quite frankly, I was just happy to finish out my career in public service as a mayor and city council member, and be a teacher. Have a long career being a teacher, and then um, it was over a year ago that I was approached by a group of individuals here in Clark County that all wanted me to consider running for state office. And I was quite humbled by the fact that they would approach me out of the blue and ask me to consider that. And then the state party, the Democratic State Party, came down to pay me a visit and asked me to consider it as well. And, after talking to my family about it, then I decided to jump in. But it was all very, very quickly. So everything happened within the matter of maybe a month or two of having those meetings to actually declaring that I'm a candidate running for the state Senate. And so, it certainly was something that I had a lot of people urge me to consider it versus me wanting to do it, kind of intrinsically.
Right. So, kind of moving forward here a little bit, like to get into obviously the sessions coming up here, the January 12th, you'll be back in session in Olympia. And you had an opportunity to pre-file some bills. And so I'd like to just discuss a couple of those. We kind of segued in from your education. So I'd like to kind of jump into Senate Bill 5849, which is financial education graduation requirement.
Right.
But what was the motivation behind this bill for you?
Yeah. So, that bill has actually come before the legislature in the past. Last time it came before the legislature, it actually sailed right through the House without any problem. It was on the Senate side that it kind of faced some obstacles. And, the biggest obstacle it faced was, not wanting to put uh, that would cost school districts money to implement, and putting basically, we've heard this phrase unfunded mandates, right? And so it didn't get very far the last time. This time around, I was approached by the treasurer's office that asked me that they really saw the value in this, and they know I'm a public school teacher. I'm actually the only active public school teacher in the state senate, and they wanted my support to get behind this. And quite frankly, it was a very, very easy decision to make. This is a bill that I know overwhelmingly supported by constituents in my district, and I'm sure it's supported widely even throughout the entire state. We need stronger teaching, stronger education for individuals that are going to eventually graduate from our public schools and move on. Look, we do a lot of things really, really well in our public schools. And one of those things we do well is when it comes to preparing kids for careers, STEM careers, so science, technology, engineering, and math, right? And generally, those are careers that, go to a 4-year university pathway. But one of the things we need to also not lose focus on is preparing kids to manage their finances when they leave school and when they have a job. So whether they go to a 4-year university or whether they go to the trades, career and technical education, they need to have some basic understanding on how do I balance a checkbook, right? How do I invest for my retirement? How do I choose the right, health insurance? How do I, what is the difference between a stock and a bond, and so on and so forth. And so these are all tools that will strengthen an individual in their life and help them make more sound decisions to set their future years up for success.
How do you see this? How do you see this program rolling out? How do you envision it coming to fruition within the school system?
Right. So we want to be as flexible as possible. We also want to, work with OSPI, work with the Board of Education, because I know they're going through some uh, long-term planning on upgrading graduation standards, and so we, I put in this bill that it would be implemented over a longer length of time. So I believe we put in there like 3 years implementation to give a time for districts to prepare as well as be able to work side by side with that long-term planning that OSPI and the Board of Education are currently performing.
And so, we mentioned the funding piece of it. Is there funding in this bill that's going to help implement it statewide?
So in terms of funding, there will be a little bit, not a whole lot, but there also is, we took out some reporting requirements that actually cost a lot of money to perform. So hoping that that would, by alleviating some of those reporting requirements, that would alleviate the fiscal note on the bill.
So you don't anticipate it having that big of a fiscal impact on public schools?
Not at all.
And who do you envision teaching these classes? Do we need more instructors, or is there people already within the schools that have the capability and the knowledge to be able to deliver?
Great question. So we want to obviously, provide maximum flexibility for districts to be able to designate the appropriate teacher or department to be able to roll this out. Although I do probably envision maybe a CTE teacher being able to, roll this out. For example, at Camas High School, we have a CTE teacher that teaches business classes, and they also run the student store too.
And for those not familiar, what is a CT?
A CTE, a certified teacher that has their CTE endorsement. Basically, they are a teacher that teaches career and technical education. So that could be a teacher that teaches a foods class or a baking class or a business class, business and marketing class, or a robotics class.
And we already have a lot of those within the school system, so it would be a matter of recruiting that or
Yeah, it would basically be, for example, if you have a teacher that teaches a business and marketing class, it would simply be easy enough to roll the curriculum into their existing
interesting. I think obviously, I know when I was in school, we didn't have any financial education. I think most kids, get their financial literacy from their parents. So if you have one generation that doesn't have any, obviously it doesn't get passed on and probably leaves, you know, us in a spot to where we're not getting better about managing our money.
right. And we want to continue. I mean, I always say as a teacher, parents are a student's first teacher. Okay. And so that should never change. And so we definitely want parents and guardians to be involved with their students and to work with their public school teachers hand in hand. But at the same time, I've talked to numerous parents just as a state legislator. And, the thing or the common theme I get from parents is, our kid is, not going to go on to a 4-year university. And so is there really a need to learn advanced algebra for this kid? And, is there a way to have a different pathway in which our kids, are taught, some sort of financial literacy to prepare them for the future.
You're right, because no matter what job or profession you have in life, you have to be able to manage your finances.
Absolutely.
Obviously, education and growth are closely connected. So that kind of brings me to our next pre-file bill that you got up, and that's the uh, 5848, which is school district impact fees. Tell us a little bit about what that's about and what brought that forward for you.
Sure. And so, as many of your viewers and listeners are aware, school districts across the state, they are running into very challenging fiscal conditions due to a whole myriad of issues. But in the event where they go into binding conditions, meaning that they receive very scrutinized oversight by OSPI to help manage their finances and get them out of those binding conditions to get more stable footing. But while they're in binding conditions, it would allow districts to be able to access their school impact fees. Now, 25% of their school impact fees for general operating purposes. And so, why is that important? Well, number one, school impact fees are dedicated funds that are only used for building new schools, so capital improvements, right? So building new schools or repairing a particular school building, they cannot be used for general operating purposes. But my bill would allow them to use up to 25% of those school impact fees for general operating purposes to help them when they're in binding conditions, kind of as a bridge, if you will. Now, will this help every single school? Well, no, it won't help schools that are not, number one, not in binding conditions, that are in good footing. And number two, not every district across the state has a large pot of school impact fees to access. And so, certainly, it is not going to help every school district, but it will be providing an additional tool that can help schools when they are in that particular situation. And it's frankly not unheard of. So, as you know, I used to serve on a city council as well as be a mayor. Many years ago, the state legislature pretty much did the same thing for cities. And what I mean by that is cities have what's called uh, a REIT tax dollar. So real estate. Anytime you sell real estate, a in the state of Washington, a portion of that sale of the real estate excise tax goes into a REIT fund, and those REIT funds can be used by local municipalities for capital improvements for the community, but they cannot be used for operations and maintenance.
Hmm.
And so many years ago, the legislature allowed cities to be able to use up to 25% towards operations and maintenance. So pretty much it's the same thing just for school districts, but it's actually even more narrowed because it only allows school districts, in terms of my bill, utilizing their school impact fees, it only allows school districts to use it when they're in binding conditions.
So, you know, what type of safeguards are in place to make sure that those fees will be used appropriately as opposed to, what's the oversight on that?
Yeah. So when a school district is in binding conditions, there is intense scrutiny on any and all finances of the district because when they're in binding conditions, they have an enhanced level of oversight by the Office of Superintendent, so the state Office of Superintendent. And so that same oversight will be there to ensure that those funds that they access under my bill will be utilized in a fiscally responsible way that will ultimately lead them out of those binding conditions. And so that's why I put in the bill specifically that they could only use them if they are in binding conditions. So a school district that is not in binding conditions, whose finances are okay, they won't be able to utilize this bill. Um, because again, those conditions or those binding conditions require an enhanced level of oversight.
Right. And so Critics argue these type of impact fees are going to adversely affect the cost of housing. What's your thought on that? Because the developers are going to have to pay these impact fees, and the argument is they're just going to pass those straight through to the consumer. So it's those same middle class taxpayers having to pick up the tab for these.
Yeah. Well, look, school impact fees have to be paid regardless. Okay. So whenever you build a house or you put a commercial building down, you have a portion of impact fees that are paid to school districts, and they vary from municipality or even county areas as well as school districts. And so those impact fees are collected regardless whether this bill passes or not, right? And so once those fees or those impact fees are collected, they're set aside into an account, and they sit there until a school district uses them, whether it be to build a new school or to repair a school. Maybe the school needs a new you know HVAC system, or it needs to repair a roof, or whatever it may be. And so, generally speaking, those funds are not accessed a lot because schools, if they're not growing, they're not building new buildings, right? I mean, they may be repairing, some buildings here and there, but if they are growing, then they can utilize those impact fees for, to build new schools. And so it's not creating an additional fee. It's just allowing them to utilize those fees that are already collected. Now, that being said, I did introduce a bill the last legislative session, and the bill is still alive. It's in Ways and Means, so it is not dead yet, but it was a bill that would have lowered the threshold when it came to how people vote for school bonds. So, as many people may already know, when a school district needs to build a new school, it goes out to the voters and it says, "Hey, we need to build a new elementary school, or we need to build a new high school," and it will put out and that bond, the people of the community, or the people of the school district boundaries, have to vote on it. But in our state, it's kind of a little wacky because it requires that vote to pass by a 60% supermajority. And so it makes it very, very difficult for those types of bills or bonds to be able to pass.
Right.
And so even though, for example, let's say a bill or a bond got, 55 or 58% vote, which, if you vote for a candidate, that candidate's winning, right? But it wouldn't win, and it wouldn't pass. And so my bill that is very separate from the one we just discussed earlier, but my bill would have lowered that to a simple majority, so 50% plus one, which is how normal elections happen, and that's to pass a school bond to build a new school. But it also would have eliminated, let me repeat that. It would have eliminated, and it would have put that in the state constitution, it would have eliminated school impact fees, which means, generally speaking, school impact fees could be anywhere from 7,500 to over $20,000 per house in some districts. And so it it could have, and still can, it's still alive. It could directly benefit working class families when it comes to purchasing a new home and make housing affordability that much better.
Right. When you say 7,500 to 22,000 a home, you're talking about new home build impact fee.
New home building, correct. Yeah, this only would apply to a new home because, again, those school impact fees are only wrapped into the purchase price of a new home, not an existing home, because an existing home already paid that whenever it was built. So
Right. So if that one goes through, then it would basically make this other bill we talked about previously null and void at that point.
right. I mean, obviously, there you'd probably still have pots of school impact fees that had already been collected in the past that maybe districts might be able to utilize if they're in binding conditions. But moving forward, yes, it would basically school impact fees wouldn't be there.
And so on that piece of affordability, you've recently made it pretty known that you would support having, homestead exemption across the board on primary residence. How would you see that program working, and where would you see making up the revenue shortfall?
Right. So when I campaigned to run for the state senate and ultimately won, my campaign ethos was to always look through the lens of what is going to make life more affordable for working class families and small business owners. So anything that would not make things affordable for working class families and small business owners would not get my vote. Anything that would help those two groups would definitely get my support. And so, on that note, yes, I do very much support a homestead exemption for primary residents, meaning the state portion of your sales tax that you pay on your house, if you're a homeowner, would be waived, and so you would see immediate relief to your property tax bill. And to be able to do that and to be able to finance that, the that portion of property taxes for your everybody's primary residence would be shifted over to investment properties, second homes, and commercial or industrial properties. Now, the argument there is, well, Senator, if we did that, then, it's going to make, commercial properties more expensive, which will, impact, maybe businesses, or it'll impact maybe multifamily residents, so on and so forth. And my argument there is, okay, I could see that argument, but at the same time, you're helping working class families. You're making homeowner affordability that much better, and when it comes to people that rent on a multifamily property, we also have some solutions when it comes to a tax credit for renters, which could offset some of those increased costs.
Yeah, so with that, would you anticipate there being an increase in secondary rental and vacation homes to make up for that overall revenue shortfall?
No, I'm actually we've done some preliminary numbers, and just a shift of what currently exists would be enough to offset the difference.
Interesting. And on that same note, you mentioned saving for small businesses and, looking at things through that lens. Yeah, you've also been a recent proponent of eliminating B&O tax altogether.
Yeah.
That's a pretty significant source of revenue for the state currently.
It is, and I'm not naive to think that that's going to be easy to do. I know it's a very significant revenue source for the state, but it's also a very unfair tax because, as many people know, and most small business owners know this, that the B&O tax is very regressive. And what that means is, let's say, sell, $300,000 at your small business. That's your gross sales before you take out expenses and payroll and all that kind of stuff. And everybody knows at the end of the day, once you take out all of your expenses for your business, the difference is your net income, right? What you have left over, and that's your profit. And generally, it's a far lower number than your gross sales, right? The problem is the state of Washington taxes you on that gross number. That's numbers that that's an amount that is quite unfair to tax because that's not how much you truly take home. And so it is a regressive tax. It does unfairly hurt small business owners in our state. And I think it should be replaced with a more fair tax. Now, I, like the governor just announced a few days ago, I advocate for a more fair tax structure in our state. And I firmly believe that we can, advocate and help working class families and small businesses by advocating for homestead exemptions for property taxes, by advocating for a cut to the state sales tax, which would save an average family of $1,200 a year. We can advocate for eliminating the B&O tax, and we can advocate for a very small and fair ultra income tax for the ultra wealthy of anything in excess of $1 million or more per year of income. We can do that and still balance the state and still provide the same services that we provide now and actually provide better footing for the state.
Now, critics will say you're going to drive all the rich folk out of the state of Washington. They're going to run away to some other state.
Yeah, well, that it's a very low hanging fruit that most of my friends on the other side of the aisle try to go with. The data is very clear and very strong that says that that doesn't happen, and that hasn't happened in states that have implemented something like this. I know there are also people that say, well, look, Jeff Bezos, he was one of the largest taxpayers and he fled to Florida so he wouldn't have to pay 700, $800 million of taxes, et cetera, et cetera. There's a flaw in that rationale. And the flaw in that rationale is this. As the vice chair of the Business and Finance and Trade Committee, my last committee meeting I had this past month, we had three companies that came before us. One was Blue Origin, one was a rocket company up north, and then the other one was Amazon. And it was their division that is creating the next generation of broadband that will be in satellites. They're putting over 3,000 satellites into space to provide new broadband service. And Amazon, which everybody knows that Jeff Bezos was the founder of and is the founder of, Amazon is investing billions upon billions upon billions of dollars in the state of Washington to create this infrastructure. They already have, and they're investing even more. So they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on the state of Washington to build out this infrastructure because they know the state of Washington has the top aerospace industry in the world. Not in the nation, but in the world. They know we have world class researchers. They know we have world class university systems to draw talent on. And so to say that, millionaires are going to flee the state, yeah, you may have, a handful here and there. But for the most part, we're not going to see a mass exodus. That is a red herring in the room.
Right. It's interesting because when you dig a little bit, you'll find that I think Washington ranks somewhere around 27, 28 as far as, uh, tax impact on individuals, so we're like middle of the road. So it's only, we're doing much better as far as taxation goes than, 25 plus other states in the union.
Very
Uh,
much so.
right. And so,
And I think it's important also to note that uh, ultra millionaires, these are millionaires that are earning incomes of $1 million and up. There are several thousands of these individuals and households in the state of Washington. And it's important to note that they are wealthy now. And even after paying a fair but small income tax on their earnings of in excess of $1 million, they will continue to be ultra wealthy after the implementation of the tax. Look, more uh, I'm more committed to helping the working class families and small business owners. The ultra wealthy, they could take care of themselves.
right. So, a lot of critics will say, though, that we're just punishing being successful.
Yeah, and I think that's an unfair statement because wealth should be rewarded, right? Wealth is being rewarded, and there's nothing wrong with accumulating wealth. I've said that numerous times, and I will continue to say that. And even after a small but fair tax is implemented on the ultra wealthy, wealth will still be rewarded.
Yeah. And so, kind of transition here a little bit. We're talking about affordable. Obviously, healthcare continues to be out of reach for a lot of people. And, it's been made worse, presumably, by decisions that are being made at the federal level. Here in the state of Washington, we've always been tip of the spear in trying to drive forward expanded healthcare for all. And I know in that same vein, you've got a pre filed bill that is the patient advocates. Tell us a little bit about what that brought about, and was there a motivation or personal story behind why that resonated with you?
Yeah, there was. It was at the end of the past session. I had a constituent that reached out to me and shared their story to me on how they had a family member that was at a hospital within my district, uh, and being able to navigate the hospital system during a very emotionally and you know uh, traumatic experience within their family. It was very difficult, and they didn't have somebody to help them navigate that system. And so what I ended up doing is I took their concern. I had my office staff and had my staff in general reach out to interested parties, the hospital community, and said, "Hey, here's an issue." And I found other people that had concerns too, other constituents that had concerns that were similar. I got a lot of input from, the hospital organizations, the medical community, and I was able to form a bill that basically will require most hospital organizations, with some carve outs for mental facilities and small rural centers, but it will require for medical facilities to have on staff at all times a patient advocate that will help a consumer, help a family be able to navigate the system, because we all know that these some of these hospitals are just so vast and so large, and being able to figure out where your loved one needs to go, what they need to access, and how the billing needs to be accomplished, so on and so forth. And so I think it's a good bill. I think it's a responsible bill, and it will help. Again, it will help working class families.
All right. So with that said, I mean, some hospitals will argue that there's an overlap with existing roles that are already in place, right? We have care management and case management. Obviously, I have almost a couple decades in the healthcare industry, and I've worked in care management, and most hospitals I worked at have had some type of patient advocate there as well. What would you say to hospitals that say, "Hey, you're just adding more cost on that we're going to have to pass on to the consumers"?
Right. And I think that's why it was important that I reach out to the hospital organizations before I drafted this bill to get their input on. And frankly, we drafted the language to basically provide flexibility for facilities to not really say that, hey, they had to hire a new person on, but they just had to designate somebody that would always be on staff to be able to provide these services. And so it's up to the hospitals on how they decide to designate these. Maybe they decide to, utilize existing personnel to, take up this responsibility. So there's no other additional costs, or the costs are kept very minimal. But at the end of the day, no organization actually brought up the fact that it would be burdensome when we reached out to everybody. So
That's interesting because, they usually have something to say about that.
right. And look, I'm very sensitive to that. The legacy we have in my district in the 18th, we have a hospital legacy. Uh, uh, the legacy system is in my district. It's a very large employer, and I value them and their services that they provide to the community. They, many months ago, when session ended, I toured the facility. I mean, frankly, I've been there before with family, but I toured the facility. I sat down with the CEO, and they shared a very compelling story, and how you know because of things that are happening at the federal level as well as the state level, they are losing and a lot of money and having to cut services. And I mean, just this year alone, they're going to lose over $40 million a year, and they can't continue to burn cash like that and still be an ongoing operating company. And I don't want to see them. I don't want to see any hospital go under because of the valuable service they provide to the community. And so I'm very sensitive on putting any regulations in place that would make it much more difficult for a hospital to operate.
Right. And with that in mind, we're talking about finances going to hospitals. Recently, session, there was a 1% reimbursement cut to the state Medicaid program. Some critics argue that, that was hurting facilities. Can you explain a little bit about what that 1% was actually cut from, as in it was cut from the budget, not from disbursement to medical facilities and providers?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% familiar with that particular bill. I'm not on the healthcare committee, but we had to make some very hard decisions because of the irresponsible policies that are being pushed down onto us at the federal level. Look, they're at the federal level. They're cutting SNAP benefits to help feed children of lower socioeconomic status. They're restructuring Medicaid to really take some of the biggest cuts to Medicaid that we've seen in a generation. That will, put people that are lower socioeconomic, window out in the cold, if you will, and not being able to afford healthcare services. And they're even looking to restructure Medicaid longer term to be able to cut Medicare, excuse me, and to be able to cut costs there for our seniors. And so, unfortunately, the state is not able to pick up all of those cuts that the federal government is implementing. And so a lot of times we have to, shift, we have to, make some, short term shifts to hopefully, ride the storm and hope for a change in administration at the federal level.
Right. I mean, that continues to be a battle that the state fights. And obviously, I think most folks know that as a whole, we give more to the federal government than they distribute back to us. Um, Kind of discouraging when you think about it, because those are services that our Washingtonians aren't able to get.
Right. Absolutely.
So kind of shifting total gears here a little bit, getting out of the healthcare market. I want to discuss one more pre-filed bill that you put up that kind of caught my eye, and that was false identification as a peace officer. I was curious to note, I didn't know this was really that big of an issue.
Yes, and so this is not only an issue in our state, but it's an issue across the nation and other states too. Talking about irresponsible, reckless actions of the federal government, as many people, if not most people, know if you've turned on the TV and watched the news, the federal government has basically given the federal law enforcement of multiple different branches, whether it be, the ATF, whether it be the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, the green light to basically go out and arrest individuals that they feel are that they want to deport. But when they do that, they do it in a very reckless manner. Now, look, I'm all for responsible immigration policy, and I'm all for if you've committed a crime and you have a criminal record here in the state or in the United States, and you're here illegally, or if you're here on a temporary status and you've committed those crimes, then you probably are on your pathway to being deported out of the country. But if you haven't committed a crime, and frankly, if you're a U.S. citizen, those individuals are getting caught up and being treated inhumanely, and masked federal officials that have no identification on them are sweeping individuals up and whisking them away to unknown locations, detaining them for, days, if not weeks or longer, with no due process, going against every fiber of our Constitution. And what that is doing is that is emboldening criminal actors out there to basically pose as federal officers and to disguise themselves and as federal officers and to kidnap people and commit heinous crimes out there like sexual assault, robbery, other crimes, all in the name of being disguised as a federal officer. And we have so many numerous accounts of that. And so my bill would put tougher penalties in there for individuals that pose as a law enforcement individual trying to basically do what I just described. It was a bill that was actually requested or at the request of the governor's office, and then the AG's office is also weighing in support of it as well.
Isn't there already penalties in place for impersonating an officer?
There are, but my bill kind of it strengthens, it puts some teeth into um, impersonators that do exactly what I just described.
Gotcha. And have you seen any of that impersonation happen down here in Southwest Washington?
Well, we've heard of incidents through I've heard of incidents through the Vancouver police in which individuals have tried to commit robberies, and people, said that these individuals were claiming to be federal officers. And so it's something that we're not isolated from down here in Clark County.
Right. And speaking of down here, Clark County, Southwest Washington, what do you think makes Southwest Washington so much different when you compare it to, that SeaTac, Central Puget Sound area? I don't know if folks, if you pull up a map, it's interesting. If you pull up a map of the legislative districts, right? Um, you know, outside of the Puget Sound SeaTac area, the districts start getting rather large, right? And it's kind of interesting to look at, but obviously we have a lot less representation as a whole in Olympia than they do up there. How do you separate and really advocate and get people on board up there regarding what we need down here in Southwest Washington?
Right. Well, in the Democratic Senate caucus, I've been welcomed with open arms when I was elected. One of those reasons why is number one, they understand how important it is to get a Democratic voice that has not been historically at the table when it comes to the 18th district. I am the first Democrat to be elected in the 18th district within the past roughly 30 years. And so, why is that important? Well, Democrats hold a very, very secure and firm control of the House. They hold a large majority in the Senate, as well as every single state office, including the governor's mansion. And so, when you have that majority, you have a bigger voice at the table. You're able to advocate and you're able to secure greater victories for your district. And so, but at the same time, I'm still able to advocate and still able to share my district's values, which are very, very different from those values of maybe Olympia or somewhere else in the Puget Sound. And quite frankly, when we're in the caucus room, my voice is heard, and thus the citizens of the 18th legislative district are heard.
How do you balance that piece, right? We're living in a time right now when politics are maybe as divided as maybe they've ever been for quite some time. How do you balance representing democratic values with also making sure that you are representing those other folks that don't identify as Democrats?
Right. Look, at the end of the day, I understand that, we are in very polarized times. And it seems as if every week that goes by, every month that goes by, it continues to get even more polarized. But at the end of the day, why I got elected and why I work so hard every day as a legislator is to, bring some of the common sense type of solutions to government. That is, how can we make daily life more affordable? At the end of the day, you have moms and dads and grandparents and guardians out there just trying to do the best they can to make a living, to raise their kids in a clean environment and a safe environment, take their kids to soccer practice, take their kids to baseball practice, whatever it may be, and put in their work so they can afford, for their families, and they can hopefully save a little for the future to retire. They don't want to get into this partisan battles. They don't care about that kind of stuff. They just want you to do things to make life more affordable for them. And And that's really what it all boils down to, right? So it's my job to look to find solutions that will continue to do that, continue to make life more affordable, while at the same time push back on irresponsible federal policies that really hurt working class families and hurt small business owners. And it's my job to have those fights and on their behalf. And so, I will work with anybody that shares those values and wants to help working class families. But if you're also putting out reckless policy and reckless rhetoric, I will stand up to anybody.
Yeah, I think well said on that. I couldn't agree more with those words. And so we like to do a segment here on the podcast. It's called "Your Welcome to Politics" moment. For some, it's funny. For some, it's sad or whatever. But you've been in politics a little bit now. And when was it that moment when you realized, like, crap, this is politics? What's this about? Do you have a moment that resonates with you like that?
Yes, I think the best example of that is when I was mayor of the city of Battleground. I became mayor during COVID. And towards the end of my term as mayor, I was up for reelection. I decided not to run for mayor again. I just decided to run as a city council member. And there were very partisan individuals that decided that they wanted to come after me, and they wanted me to enact a no vaccination, no mask ban in the city. And when I told them I didn't have the authority to do that, they didn't care, and they organized a protest in front of my personal residence. So a couple hundred people showed up. If you Google it, you'll see it. It's all in the news. And not only did they do that, but they also, my oldest daughter at the time, she played soccer, and they somehow found out where she was having a high school soccer game, and she plays goalie. And they decided to show up in mass behind her goalie box and wave all these, partisan signs and protests at her soccer game. And that was the moment that I thought, what is going on with our state of politics right now? And then subsequently, obviously the wonderful death threats and all that kind of stuff kind of followed. And so it's been a wild ride since then, but it's helped me to develop a very, very thick skin. It's certainly not for everybody, but it was one of those moments that I thought, what in the world is going on?
Right. And so how do you deal with or navigate that extreme end of those politics?
Look, like I said, it's about doing the right thing. It's about, you know, helping those everyday people out. Uh, you know, what can you do to help those everyday people out? What can you do to make life that much better for people, that much more affordable? Everything else outside of that is noise, right? They can come after me all they want. They can make stuff up about me. They can, send me death threats. They can do whatever. At this point, I've been in the public life for quite some time. I'm used to just about anything that has been thrown at me. And I just focus on the important elements of public policy.
I think that's an amazing note to wrap this up on. Senator Adrian Cortes, I appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to learn more about you or kind of follow along with this session, what's the best avenue for them?
Yeah, so you can go to, if you just Google my name, Adrian Cortes, and you can go to my legislative website. It talks about my priorities, some of the bills that I've pushed through and got to the governor's desk. And you can, reach out to my legislative office that way as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Once again, this is Evergreen Perspective. I'm Ben Chrisley, and we'll see you guys next time.